Welcome to part 2 of workshop 1, the Planetary Boundaries Framework. The Planetary Boundaries Framework defines 9 interconnected Earth systems that are essential for a healthy Earth. And it has been quantified, so there are measures that show whether humanity is going past the boundary, the safe boundary. The Stockholm Resilience Centre is the place to go if you're looking for information on the planetary boundaries. And Johan Rockström is the person who speaks and writes about it more than anybody else. And he travels the world, I would say, spreading the message. I've got a couple of really good videos of him speaking about the planetary boundaries. And what it is, in essence, is a way to know whether we are an objective way to know whether we are going across the boundaries of a safe place for humanity. So here is an excellent TED talk by Johan. I really recommend watching this. It'll bring together everything from this lecture today, but also lots of information that I can't explain as well as he does. And that one was 2024. This one I found just a couple of months ago, 2026. And he's speaking in a kind of a different tone, a bit more social, a bit less scientific, if that's your thing. This one's 8 minutes long. And his message is eternally an optimist, and his message is that staying within planetary boundaries isn't about restraint. It's about it's an opportunity to redefine what progress is, progress to a world that is more stable and more just, and that we live within the means of our only home, and that is the Earth. So here are the 9 planetary boundaries. As you can see by the sad-looking graph on the right, there we have transgressed the boundary of 7 out of the 9 key Earth systems. That transgression has happened very quickly. In 2009, we had transgressed 3 of the systems. That was the phosphorus-nitrogen cycle, climate change, and biodiversity. But since then, we have transgressed another 4. Climate change is the first one. We all know about climate change. It's measured here using carbon dioxide in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We know what climate change is doing to the world and why it's important that we reverse its effects. Here is one example of climate change, and that is melting ice sheets and melting glaciers. This article is saying that the ice sheets are melting before our eyes, and it's out of our control. The second planetary boundary is novel entities. So these are synthetic chemicals in the environment, including plastic pollution, also things like GMOs, biotechnology, and otherwise intervening in the evolutionary process and the natural functioning of the Earth. Things that we're doing without adequate safety testing. Ozone depletion is still in the safe zone. When I was a teenager, the Montreal Protocol was put in place where a lot of products had all their chlorofluorocarbons replaced with other things like propellants. Refrigeration was another area. So countries got together and decided that we're not going to destroy the ozone layer. We rather needed it because it stops UV rays from reaching the Earth's surface, not just for heating, but for cancers and things like that. Number 4 is atmospheric aerosol loading. That is small, minute particles of solid things like ash from fires or particulates from car exhausts. And we see it in things like smog in major cities. Apparently, if you work in the middle of London, it's like if you smoked 2.5 packs of cigarettes a day. Ocean acidification is a serious issue. The oceans buffer our CO2 in the atmosphere because they absorb CO2 as well. But the absorption of CO2 forms carbonic acid, and the acids get more acidic. They get the pH goes down, and that destroys the calcium carbonate shells of things like prawns and crabs and other mollusks. And it also, the more CO2 the ocean absorbs, the less it's going to be able to absorb. So it's not the best. It also is destroying whole ecosystems, and in particular coral reefs. Unfortunately, this barrier was crossed last year, and this article is about how it all affects all the different ecosystems. And this one's just one about the Ningaloo Reef, which is a heritage area up north of Western Australia. Of course, Australians are also very concerned about the Great Barrier Reef in Queensland. Planetary boundary 6 is the modification of biogeochemical flows. And that sounds a bit complicated, but it's really just the nitrogen-phosphorus cycle. So nitrogen and phosphorus are important ingredients in fertilizers. So farmers put the fertilizers on the crops, it gives them more yield, but whatever isn't absorbed into the plant is flushed into the water system, so either into aquifers or into rivers, and that imbalance of nitrogen and phosphorus in freshwater systems is a major problem. One thing it can do is cause algal blooms. So the algae forms on the top of the lake. The algae absorbs oxygen to live, and it can actually absorb so much of the oxygen out of the water that the water underneath becomes like a dead zone. So there's no oxygen left for the fish or other creatures that live under there. It's one of the most exceeded boundaries that we have. Freshwater change, so this is freshwater in soil, aquifers, and in rivers and lakes. Obviously, we've got a bit of a water crisis going on. The global freshwater crisis, you may have heard of the global water crisis before, but the graph shows the increase in demand for fresh water. And it's not just for drinking, of course, but for farming, mining, manufacturing, and the energy sector as well. This article is from Iran. What it's saying is the capital city, Tehran, is facing unprecedented water shortages. It's to the stage where their agriculture is threatened, their cultural heritage is threatened because it's so dry that the buildings are cracking. It's also a problem for manufacturing, and the government has put curfews in place, like turning the water off at a certain time of night. This, of course, is causing unrest, civilian unrest, and there's also geopolitical unrest between Iran and nearby countries fighting over water resources as well. Number 9 planetary boundary is land system change. We all know about deforestation, urbanization, how humans spreading out is disrupting habitats and biodiversity, stopping carbon sequestration that we need, moisture recycling. We've definitely fallen below safe levels of forest. Our last planetary boundary is biosphere integrity. this is basically plants and animals and their environments. These are incredibly out of balance. Not only is the number of animals falling or the number of plants, but the variety in the number of plants. So having a lot of one type of plant, like monocultures in agriculture, is not healthy for the biosphere integrity. Not just that it's more sensitive to disruption, more risky, but also it can become controlled by, like, all the seeds of cotton, or for example, can become controlled by a major company like Monsanto or now Bayer. It is said that we are in the middle of the 6th mass extinction. If humans hadn't come along, extinction rates would be between 1,000 and 10,000 times less than they are now. So we are, animals and plants are going extinct at an extremely rapid rate, mainly due to deforestation, hunting and fishing, and through climate change. Here's an example of when it sort of came back to bite us. Just before Christmas in 2025, the government of Western Australia announced large-scale fishing bans. All the fish that we like to catch for our summer holidays, and also people who make their living from fishing. And this is to protect fish stocks that have gone dangerously low. Probably would have been better to address this earlier, but we didn't. Tipping points are critical thresholds beyond which a system cannot re-equilibrate. So a system can't absorb the shocks, and it starts to reorganize abruptly, so suddenly or irreversibly. And a small disturbance can cause a large change. As well as tipping points in complex systems, you can get feedback loops where an output becomes an input. And here's an example of a tipping point. The tropical forests in Australia have switched from being a carbon sink to a carbon source. And this is an excellent article, and as you can see that I have put quite a lot of it on the LMS under the tabs, so go and have a look. Buffering capacity is like what the oceans can do. So it's the property of a system that allows it to absorb shocks and changes and return to equilibrium, which is what we've been doing throughout the Holocene period, which preceded the Anthropocene period. But once the buffering capacity is exhausted, new shocks or changes to the system or new things put in, they can start to cause unpredictable, uncontrollable, or irreversible change to the system. The oceans are currently buffering a lot of our CO2 emissions by absorbing it into the ocean. But once the CO2 in the ocean becomes saturated, it won't be able to, and then the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is going to increase much faster because of that. It's not being absorbed by the ocean. Here's an example of a feedback loop. So clouds reflect the light so that it can't reach the ground and do global warming things. So clouds help to keep the earth cooler by reflecting sunlight back out into space before it can reach the ground. But shiny white clouds reflect more sunlight than grey, broken clouds. And clouds closer to the equator absorb more sunlight because there is more sunlight there. So warming changes are happening, and they're changing the wind patterns, which changes the cloud patterns. And the area that's covered by high reflective clouds is shrinking. and then therefore more sunlight is reaching the Earth's surface, leading to extra heating, which is causing more of the changes to the clouds. So this is what's called a feedback loop. It's a positive feedback loop because it's getting bigger and bigger, not because it's good. Feedback loops can be positive in the good sense. Here we've got China, who have planted 66 billion trees in their Great Green Wall to slow down the spread of the Gobi and Taklamakan deserts. So they have deliberately planted 66 billion trees. That's a lot of trees. And so what's that, about 66 trees per person in China? So it's a climate mitigation strategy. It also increases biosphere integrity because more plants, more animals can start to grow in those trees and undergrowth. It also makes it possible to grow food, and it's more space that's habitable rather than inhabitable, and therefore we don't have to cut down trees somewhere else in order to live. And that is it for today.